Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. Today, I'm here with Michael Kruger. He is the president of ADRA International. Thank you for joining us, Michael. How are you doing?
Wonderful to be here. Very good. And yourself, Alyssa?
I'm doing good. It's bright and early in the morning here, and
Yes, it is.
it's a nice day so far.
Yeah.
So tell me real quick, what does ADRA stand for?
ADRA stands for the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. And, within our name, it describes what we do, the two arms, if you would say, of the work that ADRA does. On the one hand, relief, the humanitarian, the emergency responses, which probably most people know us best for, the earthquakes, fires, destruction around the globe. And the other is development, which actually makes up the majority of the work that we do around the world. That's far more long-term. We will spend many years with a community in a particular place, rebuilding that community in various ways. So that really describes the two pillars of what ADRA does.
I know that we're here to talk about your life story, but I'm going to dig into that for just one second,
sure.
Because you are right. I think a lot of people think of you as an institution, organization that goes in during moments of crisis and hands out water bottles or, takes care of things. But ADRA, although you do that, is much more of a long-term.
Correct.
You partner with local entities. You work to help that community for a much longer period of time.
That's right.
Why?
If you consider any kind of disaster, whether it's natural or man-made, doesn't really make any difference. Take a tsunami, for example. So, tsunami, sweeps through, destroys thousands of homes and buildings and institutions in a community. Well, yes, there is the emergency response. So you're on the ground within 24 hours, and you want to prevent the outbreak of all manner of diseases as a result of that. You're bringing immediate aid, shelter, clean water, maybe access to some forms of medication, shelter, all those kind of things. Well, then what? So once you've done that, 4, 6, 8 weeks in, well, now these communities need to rebuild. And ADRA's, if I can say, value proposition, the core issue of what makes us who we are is that we stay on for the long haul. In other words, we then begin helping them to rebuild their communities. And so, yes, we get involved in construction projects, many things of that nature. And so, there are NGOs that will go in and will do that 4 to 6 weeks sort of surge capacity and deal with the immediate need and pull out. But that's not how we work. We have permanent establishments in over 132 countries, where sometimes we've been there for 25 or 30 years and even longer, because there are ongoing needs within those respective communities. And that's just who we are. It's how we work.
So from a theological perspective, so that's just who we are, is what you said. But from a theological perspective, is there a deeper reason why we do this, why we don't just come in and walk out?
If one looks at Scripture, let's be honest, it's about people. Why did Jesus come to earth? He was reconciling us to the Father. As you read through the Bible, Jesus is engaging with people, and he cared about people. And that, to me, is the fundamental issue. That, yes, if we stick around for 4 to 6 weeks, it doesn't mean that, and we leave, it doesn't mean that we don't care. But if we look at that need and that longer-term need of people, I suppose in one way is, how do we walk away? How do we do that? Because you start to form relationships, you do those kind of things. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, we want to emulate what Christ did on earth. And so if we're spending a longer time in that community, probably the most common question I'm asked around the world, and I've been asked this by mayors and prime ministers and presidents, it doesn't matter. The standard question is, why are you doing this for us? People ask that at a community level, at all manner of levels. And if you're sticking around for the longer term, you're really able to articulate that response. You can live it out. And, what our prayer is that over time people will connect with the ADRA workers. And yes, we don't directly proselytize. We cannot do that because we're using, government and institutional funds. But we can live our life as Christ did. And then people ask the question. And once that door's open, we're able to share a much greater hope with them. And that's always the desire, is that we would plant that seed of hope, within those communities.
And I think that sometimes people kind of misunderstand the whole harvest cycle,
Yes,
as we like to
yes,
call it,
yeah.
is that there are some people who plant seeds.
Correct.
There are some people who are watering them.
That's
There's
it.
some people who, put the fertilizer
Yeah,
on them.
yeah.
And then there are people who harvest the seed.
100% correct. Yeah,
And every organization doesn't have to do all the parts.
absolutely agreed.
For some, you are just their first introduction to Christianity,
Yeah, that's true.
to Adventism.
Yeah.
And by
yeah.
living out the example, when they meet somebody else, when this comes up to their mind later, they
Yes.
know these are the people who genuinely care about us.
That's correct.
In a moment of
Correct.
need, they're who I can go to. So whether it's a physical need or an emotional need or a
yeah.
spiritual need,
Yes,
you're
yes.
someone they would trust.
That's correct. And, maybe just to add on to what you just said there, why is ADRA one of the largest NGOs in the Middle East? Well, fundamentally, and we've been told this in countries like Syria and Yemen and that type of thing, is that our lifestyle choices as Adventists really appeals to the Muslim mindset. The fact that you don't eat pork, the fact that you don't drink alcohol is very, very important to them. So they see a difference in us immediately, and they go, well, why are they different? And over, that has built a deep sense of trust with many who are of the Muslim faith. And look, we know that our actions don't save us. We know all of those things. But our lifestyle choices do speak to many other religions, and particularly the Muslim faith. And it does open the door to the conversation of, why is it that you don't partake of alcohol? Other Christians do. And so the minute that door is open again, it gives us the opportunity to share mostly, and to be honest, I share my own life story. I think that is most impactful and meaningful in people's lives.
Well, speaking of your life story, let's get into this.
Right.
So, Michael, I believe you are Australian. Would that be accurate?
No, South Africa.
Oh,
There you go.
now I feel really bad. So you are South African. Mm-hmm. So you were born there.
Yes, I was.
So tell me a little bit about your parents and where you were born.
Yeah. Born in Johannesburg, South Africa. My parents, the connection with Adventism, I suppose, comes through my mother's line. My father was not an Adventist and never became one. My mother, she actually traces a line back to, I think her great-grandmother was part of the original Seventh-day Adventist congregation in Kimberley in South Africa. That's sort of the line, a lot of what they call the sisters, through those generations. And my mother, I think, went to probably one of the first Adventist boarding school in South Africa, didn't have a good experience, and once she finished school said, well, I'm done. She was sort of done with the church, and made a statement that no child of hers would ever enter Adventist education. She really didn't have a good experience with that. And she met my father at work. They fell in love and got married.
What do your parents do?
My father, well, I should say my late father, he's been dead many, many years now. They both worked in the bank. They were bankers.
Okay.
And once I was born, my mother stopped working at that stage. So, and my father obviously continued until he passed away. Years later. But I think I was 6 or 7 years old when my parents, as I'm told, had the conversation that sort of well, the boy needs some kind of a religious instruction type of thing. And my mother on a Sabbath morning would go and visit her mother. So she said, well, I'll drop him at church, which happened to be the Adventist church, for Sabbath school, and I'll pick him up afterwards. And to be honest, that was my life from the age of 6 or 7. Sort of a Saturday morning, Sabbath is where I went off to Sabbath school.
So they would. So she didn't come in with you.
She didn't come in. No.
So you would, as a cute little 6 or 7-year-old
That's
Michael, you would
in
walk
with my little bag or whatever. Yes.
and you would just go into a Sabbath school.
I go into sort of what we would call the junior Sabbath school today, and it was a fairly small church, maybe 150 members or so, and I became part of that, and eventually become a teenager, and you would sit in with all the teenagers type of thing. And to be honest, I think I was in my late teens before I ever went to what we would call divine service. I mean, it was the longest day of my life. I mean, Sabbath school and divine service. I mean, like it never ended.
It's like doubled the time.
Yeah, it's like I've done my bit, and I was baptized in my early 20s, and actually my mother and I were baptized together. My mother actually came back.
Oh, I feel like we fast forwarded a lot in that story.
Yeah, that's to say we sort of jump, but she sort of came back. And so, yes, those formative years of life was really, my engagement with the church was through the Sabbath school. That was it. And, I would say in many respects that was where my grounding was. And yes, through those sort of high school years, and I would maybe play sport on a Sabbath, wouldn't go to church. It wasn't a big deal. So I kind of went to church so long as it didn't,
interfere
with anything else type of thing. And as I said, it was really only my early 20s where I then made the decision, to join.
So now I know that you said your maternal lineage,
Yes.
I guess you could say,
Yeah,
had
that's
some.
it.
Now, was
Yeah.
your grandmother or anybody going to that church at that time?
My grandmother, maybe in the very early years, sort of what I would call high days and holidays, as we used to say.
Okay.
They would
Yep.
come along. There was my mother's...
The Easter, Christmas.
Yeah, that's it.
type thing.
My mother's elder brother, her elder brother, was very engaged with the church, and he and his family were at the church. So that was, I had,
So you had some
connection.
sort of a
I wasn't
connection
entirely on my own. But again, her younger brother and sister not. So
Do you remember anything from those very early years, like any Sabbath school teachers or lessons, something that like kind of stuck with you as you kind of grew older?
I don't know if it was the lessons as much, but there were people, there were individuals in those years that really stand out. Just special people that, you just formed a bond with. And I can sort of see their faces now as it goes by. And to be honest, and maybe it's because I didn't come from a traditional Adventist background, I asked a lot of questions. People would say something and I would challenge it and say, well, why? Show me that.
Oh, they loved
that
you.
type of thing. And I remember, I think it was sort of what we would call early teen. I don't know if you call it that anymore, but the teacher eventually said to me, she came to me one week and she had an old copy of The Great Controversy, and she said to me, please go home and read this and please stop asking all these questions every week. She says, I don't know how to answer most of them. And, maybe because it wasn't a traditional background, I challenged everything. I suppose at that time of the Adventist church, I loved my father. He wasn't an Adventist. I was in a very conservative congregation, so the sense was, well, your father better convert, otherwise he's not going to be saved, kind of thing. And that's difficult to reconcile in your mind. He's your father, you love him. You keep kind of getting this message at church, and I think it was, that element in my mind that I was struggling with. In terms of salvation and all of these kind of things, which is why I challenged everything. I wanted to understand it. You're making these statements. Well, show me. Where in the Bible does it say that type of thing? And I think that gave me what I would call a very solid grounding to the point where I got to the point where I knew what I believed, if I could put it that way. It wasn't something which someone had given me or told I needed to do. It was my own journey, I suppose.
So you said a teacher, handed you the Great Controversy,
Yes.
so you would stop asking questions. I love
Yes,
that.
yes.
How old were you when you were handed this, do you think?
13 or 14, I'd say, roughly. Yeah.
We hand a 13, 14-year-old, here you go, just stop asking me questions.
Just go and read this book.
Did you read it?
I actually did. I can't say I read it cover to cover at that stage, but
I was going to say, it's a deep book.
yeah, kind of, I read sort of starting, it sort of starts with the destruction of Jerusalem and that part of it kind of gripped me a little bit. And then, I'd read some chapters I didn't enjoy that much, and I'd skip to others, and, I kind of...
Not enjoying you. Keep moving.
I had enough of you. I'll go to the next one, and found my way through. But it was interesting. It gave me, I suppose, a framing of the world, an understanding. When we talk about the meta-narrative of Scripture, we use these kind of things. There was this overarching element of, the plan of redemption, and, what I was always intrigued with. The future. I remember I bought all Marvin Moor's books, type of thing. The end times, and people who had predicted when Christ would return. For some reason, that always just fascinated me. I don't know. Which is, in a way, I think the Lord intervened with the Great Controversy, because those parts of it sort of gripped me, and I was interested in that. And to be honest, it probably sat on my shelf for many years after that, just kind of looking at the spine of the book, and never really read it cover to cover in many respects.
The nice thing about the Great Controversy, too, is it helps us to be able to understand the formation of the Christian church.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true. So if within Adventism, Ellen White, who's one of our founders, she had written 5 books, and they basically, the first 4 take you through the entire Bible. So
Yes,
Patriarchs and
yes.
Prophets, Kings. Desire of Ages, Acts of the Apostles. All sounds like,
yeah,
wait.
Yeah.
But then we have the Great Controversy, which is the bookend.
Correct.
And this actually takes us after the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, we get to have this beautiful journey, which at 13 was maybe a little harder and, to appreciate. But it's a beautiful journey through understanding how Christianity came to be what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely.
How different theological thoughts were formulated and created. And it's a beautiful book for those who have not read it.
Yeah.
Sorry, have to clear my throat. Yeah. But okay, so let's talk a little bit about your high school, your elementary school experience. So obviously, you did not go to an Adventist school.
No.
Right?
I was not at all.
You're like, nope, did not go in those doors.
Mom said, no, that's not happening.
You're like, we can go to Sabbath school,
right.
but not elementary school.
Correct.
So tell me a little bit about your elementary schools. What were the things that you were interested in? What did little Michael enjoy?
As I reflect back, it probably in some ways a different world to what we live in today. We grew up in a suburb. My friends were in the suburb. We get home from school, we get on our bicycles, and the only issue was, or when the street lights come on or the sun sets, make sure you're home. That was the world I grew up in. And from grade 1, I went to school on a bicycle, as did most of my friends, and we'd meet up along the road, and we'd cycle to school. And to be honest, I feel I had a wonderful childhood. I had good friends, and yes, I was the only Adventist in the school. It was probably a school of maybe sort of 1,000 children. It was a fairly large school, not that far from home. I enjoyed my friends. I loved swimming. I loved I don't know. We would play marbles. We'd go down to the creek, and we'd float twigs in the water, and it was just we lived outside. Everything was outside.
That was much of my childhood, so I understand.
That's how we lived. It was I would just say it felt like a very free life. I had a happy childhood, and through those years, I wasn't a great sport. I enjoyed sport, but I was never a great sportsman. I was the guy who, the teacher would choose, 2 captains and say, right, pick someone for your side. And I always say, oh, my goodness, Lord, please don't let me be the last one on the bench who hasn't been selected or chosen. I wasn't the great, soccer player or, cricket or any of the games that we did.
Wait, can you play cricket?
Yes, I can. I actually played it into high school. But
someday you're going to have to explain it to me, because there's this park near me, and every Saturday morning on my way into church, there's these people out playing cricket. And I really want to understand the game because it fascinates me. So you kind of enjoy sports? Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
Are you musical?
Great. No, I'm not.
Okay. That was very quick answer.
No, well, I'll explain why. Because it was interesting. High school, it's not high school now. Now I'm jumping all the way forward. Obviously, I got married, and our kids were at, I think it was elementary or middle. Obviously in South Africa we've only got what we call primary and high school. There's no middle school. And I think it was my eldest daughter. They're all very musical. My wife is very musical. Her whole family's musical. And I remember with the music teacher come out after one of their lessons, whether it was music theory or flute or, all of the things they did. And they were talking, and, the teachers were fascinated. They said to her, well, your older brother's musical, you're musical, your younger sister's musical. And she said, yes, my mother, she plays the piano and that. And the question was, well, what does your father do? And she looked at me, and looked at the teacher and said, he can't even fly in middle C on the piano keyboard, kind of thing. So I was very quickly putting my place. He
plays the radio.
Yeah, that's right. Just leave music alone. If I'm singing in church, he would kind of look at me and go, oh, no, Dad, you're kind of off key now.
Oh, no.
So I knew very quickly where I was in terms of the musical world.
That's not what you gave them. You gave them other things.
Yes. As I said, the Lord blessed me with means to be able to pay for all those music lessons.
There you go. All right. So you go to high school. Now, you said something. You said you were one of the only Adventists probably in your school. So you're starting to find an identity with this church. Even though it's something you're kind of just dropped off at.
Yeah.
There is still this identity that is still being formed.
Yes.
When does your mother start coming to church?
probably in my late teens, I'd say, somewhere around about there, maybe when I was 18, 19.
Why?
Wow, that's actually a good question. I don't know exactly what triggered her. I think, I was then staying for sort of divine service, the whole thing. And I think, I suppose in one way with my mom, it is kind of, oh, well, she'll just, I don't know, maybe just sort of stick around, wait. I'm not actually sure. Maybe that's something I need to ask her. I'm not 100% sure.
Well, because, often you would think that you don't drop a 6-year-old off at Sabbath school and walk away. Like that, when we talk about, sometimes we talk about people leaving the church, but they sometimes come back when they have children. So because, you're going to bring them in, you want them to have some kind of formation.
Right.
But she kind of didn't do that. And then she comes when you're like an adult, basically.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, as I say, I don't remember exactly the trigger. I know it's interesting at the time, my father had expressed some interest, and there were the church was running a stop smoking plan, and I know he'd gone to that. And I know the pastor at the time had run, I think it was a Daniel Revelation seminar, and my father had actually gone. And I don't know if my father and mother were there, but I do remember my father had gone, and also went away with a bit of a sense of, he sort of said, man, he said, you guys think you're the only ones ever going to be saved. I remember him sort of saying that. He struggled with the whole, sort of the presentation of Daniel and Revelation. But I can't remember exactly if that was the time when my mother was starting to come back. I think there was some expression of interest, from both of them. And clearly my father was seeking something. The very fact that, that he did come to some of those seminars, the fact that he was part of the Stop Smoking, there was something there, and maybe it was just simply the people were reaching out. People were friendly, people were inviting and engaging. And that could be, but again, speculation. I'm not 100% sure.
We don't know.
Don't know what brought my mom back. No.
So you make a choice to be baptized. Would you say that your baptism and your conversion, really finding God, happened at the same time?
No. I was convinced of the truth, and I was baptized. I'd waited out all my sort of friends, who, some of them had been baptized in their what I would call early teens, and I kind of held out. I wasn't entirely convinced, and so I was a lot older, obviously, than sort of my peers within that congregation, and. Again, I think because there were fundamental issues I was still struggling with. I'd accepted
Which ones
faith.
were you struggling with the most, do you think?
I think it was this overarching issue of, do you have to be an Adventist to be saved?
Which isn't something we actually believe.
Yeah, it's not.
It's something that
But
somehow
it
comes
was,
across.
It does, it was. And certainly, again, I say I was in a very conservative congregation. I think that was, put it that way, that's the message I got.
Fair.
whether it wasn't, and so again, I struggled with that. And I needed to, and so again, I came to the point where I was convinced, of the truth as the Adventist Church presents it. And so I was baptized. But the reason I say that my conversion and baptism were not at the same time, after my baptism, some years later, I met Delaney, now my wife, and now she comes from a very traditional Adventist family. I mean, her brother-in-law was a pastor, her brother was a pastor, so he has this kind of very much this outsider guy, coming into a very traditional family. And as she reflects back, when she hears me preach these days, she would use the word, she'd say, man, you're a miracle. And I go, why? She says, because I know the man I met.
Wow.
So I know the Lord had me on a journey. And I was combative. I struggled with Ellen White. I really did. In my older teens, early 20s. And that's where I'd say the man who's played the singular role in my life in terms of my conversion was Dr. Peter Landless. He was the pastor of the church, now of my wife's church. So by this stage, I'd left the church, where I'd grown up. And, I'd met her, and I wanted to be with her. So, she was a member of the Orange Grove congregation. So I lipped over and, became part of that group. And he very much took me under his wing. And I remember, he would run on a Friday evening. We'd have the youth, would be around at his home, and he'd do things. And I probably was being my combative self. And I was at university at this stage. And he called me over one evening. He said to me, Michael, he says, you're a very bright, you're an articulate guy, etc., etc. And he says, but I want to ask you a question. how much of Ellen White have you read? And I sort of said, oh, yeah, I sort of went back to those great controversy days. And
I had it on my bookshelf.
No, I read a bit. And he said, no, that's not what I'm asking. How much? He said, I'm not asking you how much you've heard people say about Ellen White. I'm not asking you what, how other people have, used it or misused it. He said, I'm asking how much have you read for yourself? And he had me there, because the truth is I had a lot to say, but I hadn't really read it for myself. And he said to me, all right, he says, I'll make a pact with you. We'll take Great Controversy again. And he says, we'll read it together, cover to cover. Okay. He says, I'll start reading it, you start reading it. And we'll really start to discuss things as we go. And as they say, that was the start of the journey, because when I began to read for myself, and I wasn't judging Ellen White by what everybody else said she says, then I read The Desire of Ages, and I began a journey. But it took his commitment and his time to say to me, hey, let's walk this road together. Someone walked it with me.
I love that, because I think this is probably one of the most common problems we face, actually, with Ellen White's writings.
Yeah, sure.
And, my husband has actually read all of her books.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. I think he's even worked his way through the manuscripts, right? But he did it because he had the same kind of a philosophy. It's like, I can't keep putting her down if I haven't read it.
Right,
so then the more he read, the more he loved.
Yes.
When I was young, I actually started buying her books for myself when I was in high school.
Right.
And I fell in love with her writings because through her writings, I fell in love with God.
Yes.
However, there was many periods with me talking badly about Ellen White, but it was because it was based off just everyone else saying things. 100%. And I see this a lot. My even my own children, they're like, they'll be like, oh, Ellen White. Well, and then my oldest started actually reading her for herself.
Yes.
And it opens up a whole new world.
You're so right. Just you say that, and it just a memory triggered as you said that. The one thing I would credit Dr. Landless with is that he was very astute. And so, yes, we read that, but at the same time, he said to me, I love reading. I've always loved reading my whole life. And he said, let me introduce you. And he gave me some books by Morris Venden. And I loved Morris Venden's books. I mean, I would read them cover to cover within a week, and I'd get another one from him. And one weekend he said to me, have you ever looked at the back of the book who Morris Venden's quoting? And we open up the books, and there Morris Venden, over and over again, is attributing statements to Ellen White in whatever, Patriarchs and Prophets, or in Prophets and Kings, or in Desire of Ages and that. And I remember sitting there that one evening and realizing I've voraciously, gone through all of Morris Venden's books, and I'm realizing, but that's predicated on what he's read obviously within Scripture primarily, and then within Ellen White. And I think that just opened a door. It opened a door for me where, I think a lot of the resistance within myself, I realized, that was about me. It wasn't about, her writings. And so at the same time, I'm sort of reading Great Controversy. That then opens the other door where I'm realizing, well, here's a man whose writings I then fell in love with. And I'm going, but hang on, he's quoting Ellen White. So I think that was just such an excellent way. I think, Peter read me so well. Said, get the guy to read this. Let me not do everything, with Ellen White. Maybe it's a bit much. And, from there, as I say, the kind of the ball started rolling. And then I read for myself more and more and realized that, quite frankly, a lot of what I had heard had been a misuse by many of what she had written, or a misunderstanding of how they had understood things.
I love this too, because he journeyed with you. And it makes me realize that something we really need to do is journey with individuals through it.
Yes.
Help them to see the beauty that is her writings and
That's
her
right.
love of God. I mean, over and over, it's like she just wants to point you to Jesus, not to herself, to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think she would be appalled, honestly, for how she has been misused.
Terribly.
To clobber us over our heads at different times. Although I didn't get much of that. I was fortunate. So you're in university now, and I love that you pulled Dr. Landis, because I actually know where you are in this, because I have interviewed Dr. Landis, and I remember his life story.
Okay.
So I'm like, I can envision this whole entire scenario now. You go to university. What do you go to university for?
Finance. So, eventually I qualified as well. In the US, you call it a CPA. I qualified under the British system as a chartered accountant. So I was a finance major, as you would, call it here. And it was during that time. So, I'm studying finance. That was my trajectory. I knew I would sort of join an audit firm, do my what we would call our articles of clerkship, which means you had to work for 3 years before you could get your, professional qualification and then go off and do your own thing. And again, it was during those years, where I'd met Delaney, and Peter Landless was then playing this very instrumental role in my life. So all of that was happening at the same time. So I'm at university. I'm looking to get qualified, and as I said, I'd met Delaney, very traditional family, and I suppose in one way, I'm an only child. I have no brothers or sisters. So, she's one of three. So he has a much larger family that I sort of become part of. And to be honest, those years were difficult for me in that, I mean, when when Delaney's brother's a pastor and a brother-in-law's a pastor, and you've done church all morning, and you come home and it feels like over the lunch table you're doing church more and doing church in the afternoon.
It's small group.
So it's like it was like, oh my goodness, this is does this
lot
day
of church.
never end? Sort of say, I would be the one going, is the sun ever going to go down on the day?
You're counting those hours.
Yeah, I was. So, all these experiences were happening at the same time. I'm at university. I'm studying. I fell in love, with Delaney, and I'm now becoming more and more part of this very traditional Adventist family. Peter's playing this, this critical role on the side, walking with me. So this is all sort of happening at the same time, and. It just, I'm very grateful to Delaney and her family of how they accepted me, and her mom and dad were great, and her father was wonderful in terms of, they just, continued to encourage me with my studies, and my intention was to open my own business. I'd have my own professional practice, and they were very instrumental in continuing to encourage me as were my own parents in terms of that, and so again. Even though I was on this journey of struggling with many issues and, challenging issues, I was surrounded by people who loved me and continued to, I suppose, just gently guide the steps without being overt about it, just allowing me to journey and giving me the space and the time for the Lord to work on me. And that's really what it was. It was just the Lord working on me, obviously through His Spirit, but again through other people who became instrumental. And that church, the Orange Grove Church, became, in many respects, my family. The people within that congregation just were so warm and accepting. And that, for me, was just so absolutely instrumental.
I love that because we have to be patient for people's journeys.
Yes.
We don't know how God is going to lead them. And we don't want to rush something when the Holy Spirit is working on something else. I observe this a lot where it's like we try to push young people into something.
Right.
But when we just journey with them and we answer their questions, it's always amazing to me to watch how God works in their lives.
Right.
So you graduate.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You have a cap and gown. Here's your diploma.
Off you go.
What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like any, I joined a professional firm. I did my years there, and then transitioned very quickly to another finance professional. Worked for him for a number of years, and then I broke away on my own. I formed my own business, and really for the next 25 years, that's what I did. I was building my own business. I continued to get more and more clients, and more staff, and things grew, and the Lord blessed enormously, and. By then, I suppose it's in traditional. You're married, you start having the kids. We were blessed with 3 wonderful children.
Now, did your children go to an Adventist school?
No, they didn't.
Okay, I was just curious at this point. So you get married. Are you still active, involved in this church?
Very much so. Yeah, but by this stage, I'm I think I was like 28 years old, and I was made the head elder of the congregation. And Peter Landis was then the sort of the senior pastor at that stage, and. I remember my father was an Adventist, and he was kind of going, "Oh, that's just weird, head elder at 28 years old. What do you know?" kind of thing. So, I mean, I was very involved. I mean, I was on the board. I was just so engaged.
Did you
at
preach
that
a
point.
sermon?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember preaching your first sermon?
I do.
Tell us about your first sermon.
Well, I remember I actually typed it on an old typewriter, which I know many hearing won't even know, but literally I typed it on an old typewriter. And word for word. And I mean, to be honest, I was terrified. I mean, it was, you're standing up there behind the pulpit and all these faces are kind of looking at you, type of thing. What did help me, what I did at school is I joined an organization called Toastmasters International, which is a large global public speaking organization. So I had received formal training in public speaking for many years. I've been part of that for 6 or 7 years. So again, I was comfortable with public speaking. But again, the sermon was just something else. You're sitting there and there's pastors in the congregation. You think, who am I?
I've often thought that about if I was ever asked to preach, which I will never be asked to preach at my local congregation. It's like there's like really a lot of pastoral knowledge, BRI knowledge. I'm like, I would never want to preach.
No, that's right. That's right. No, but you know what I learned, Alyssa, was that we all have a story. Everybody has a story. And God, I mean, what are we told? The very rocks will cry out if we don't speak. The Lord will speak through anyone. The question is, are we as the listener willing to hear? Yes, so often we go to the church and go, I hope I'm going to enjoy the sermon today, and who's preaching and this kind of thing. And always reminds me, it's essentially about me. Have I prepared my own heart going to church? Have I prayed that the Lord would speak to me? Not the person behind the pulpit, not the person who's speaking, but am I open to hear the Holy Spirit through, the mechanism of somebody else is the instrument that day, fundamentally. And that's the lesson that I've learned over the years, is that, no, I'm by no means the most qualified person by any means, but I have a story, I have a journey, I have a relationship with Christ, and He can use me. He can use you. He can use anybody, quite frankly. Because that, at the end of the day, is what God's looking for. He's saying, give me someone who has a willing heart. And with a willing heart, He can change the world. Literally, I believe that. And that to me, and that's what I always remember, is I'm an instrument in His hands. Yes, obviously I prepare, I pray, every time I preach, that the Lord will speak through me, because that's what I've learned over the years. It's the Lord knows what a group of people need to hear at a particular time. And not only on Sabbath morning. As the ADRA president, I'm engaging with people all around the world at all levels of society. As I said, from presidents to mayors to community leaders to church leaders, it doesn't matter. My prayer is always, Lord, speak through me today. This is not about me. It's not about my supposed wisdom. He is infinite. And I think it's that constant reminder that we are an instrument in His hands. That's the fundamental issue. It doesn't matter what the conversation is. It doesn't matter if it's the sermon on Sabbath. It doesn't matter if you're taking Sabbath school. It doesn't matter if you're speaking at a Vesper service. It really doesn't matter. Because the Lord can use those words to touch someone's heart. And I always think, you stand up in front of a congregation. You don't know what that congregation needs on that day. You don't know what maybe one person needs that day. But the Lord knows. And the question is, am I, as the speaker of the day, willing to be used? And there's times where I've sat and I have in my mind prepared the sermon, and I'm sitting in Sabbath school and there's the strongest impression that says, nope, that's not the message for the day.
And that's always scary. I've had that happen one time where it was like 10 minutes beforehand, and I changed my entire sermon because it just was not the right sermon.
Correct.
Even though you prepped all week,
That's it. Yeah, you've done
doesn't
all of
matter.
that. And then, no, the Lord says no. And as I say, many times I sit and then, as I say, I have, I wrestle with the Lord and go, but, no, I can't change this now. And, when we are willing, He just speaks through us. And I found that those times, I've just seen congregations move, not through my words, but simply because I stopped and listened and said, all right, Lord, I'll be willing to present what you want. And that's when the Lord can work the best, when we're a willing instrument.
I love it. So for those of us out there who are ever scared of it, just be a willing instrument.
That's it.
Open to what the Spirit, I pray every day for the Holy Spirit, for Him to give me the wisdom, the strength to take control of my mind, to be able to tell me
Yeah.
what I should do.
Yeah.
I think we don't often ask for his power enough.
Yes. Yes.
Because when we are in tune with him and we're willing to be used by him, I think he's ready to move in our lives.
Yes. Yes.
So you have 3 kids?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about being a father. How did that change your life?
I often hear young couples say, well, you must never let children change your life. And I always just sort of chuckle to myself and say, well, I'm not sure how that is even remotely possible. But yes, obviously it changes your life. It changes your priorities. I mean, the first time my eldest son, Kyle, was born, and I had the privilege of being in the delivery room, and you hold this child in your arms. I mean, it's just, it's probably the most moving thing that anyone can experience. Seeing creation and seeing God's hand, just the miraculousness of God, and seeing what he can do. And it does change you. I think, my wife and I, in some ways we're adrenaline junkies. We loved, speed, and I love to bungee jump off bridges, and
Wait, we're going to explore this one for a second. We'll come back to the parenting aspect. You and Delaney. So for anyone who's listening, you guys go to the same Sabbath school as me. So I see you as this adorable, cute couple that sits in the in the chairs and offers some insights here there. You like bungee jumping?
Yeah, no. As I say, I look back at those formative years. I mean, we'd leave the youth group, and she'd go to me, well, who's going to get home first, you or me? And I mean, there we'd be racing the dark streets at night with one another to see who's going to get there first, kind of thing. And if we got on a jet ski or in a speedboat, it was who could go faster and who could get there. And I mean, it's what I absolutely loved about her. She just had this love for life kind of thing. And she just
I would never
things.
have put that with Delaney. She's so precious. That was not. I would not have thought. Yeah. But now I can see it. I can see a little glimmer in her eye.
Yeah, there was this. It was that. And but it does change. You have children, and things do change. I mean, I remember. I had.
You did not speed home from the hospital with him, I hope.
Well, you say that. That's quite funny. I remember I was taking my son down to, I think it was my son and eldest daughter, to church camp. It was about a 6-hour drive from home. And I just got a new car. And
you mean it was supposed to be a 6-hour drive?
Yes. And my son says, Dad, can we see how fast this car can go? Kind of thing. And I said, well, once we're on the back roads, and we did open up and we're speeding along. I said, but just, make me one promise. This is between you and I. Don't tell Mom, kind of thing, And, I remember a week later, Delaney was with me at this stage, and we're picking them up. And I mean, the first words out of Carl's mouth, he looks at his mother, he goes, Mom, you got no idea how fast Dad's car can go. And,
so how fast could your car go? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, fast.
You're like, I'm not going to.
And I kind of got you were going that fast with my child in your car kind of thing.
It became my child and your car.
Your car, that's right. I'm going, this is the same woman who would race home from youth with me. So, yeah, we do change. I suppose the bottom line is you do become more responsible, and maybe it took me a little longer to become more responsible than her. But yeah, it does. It does change your life. You realize that, as a parent, these children are looking to you. You need to be around. You need to care for them. You need to look after them. You need to, you put yourself out there. It's about them. It's not about you anymore. And that was the issue. Both Delaney and I, we poured our lives into our kids. Whether it was all the extracurricular activities at school, and Delaney started then teaching the Christian classes. It was a secular school, but they had Christian classes, and she started to teach that, and so we got very involved in that community. And again, a lot of our friends, and yes, obviously we were going to church. So in a way, I wouldn't say we lived in two worlds, but we had essentially two fairly distinct friend groups. One, those who were at church and were part of a broader friend group, and then those coming out of the the school community. And so we in some ways we lived, moving through those two worlds, through the time of, and our children, all of them went to the same school, all the way from, as you would say, elementary, all the way till, what in the US you would say the senior year, when they finally graduated. Now, my youngest didn't, because obviously that then transitions to the story of how did I get to ADRA?
Yes, let's get to
owning
there.
his own business. But yeah, so, certainly all the years we were in South Africa, the kids were at the same school.
So you own your own business. I am very intrigued by this.
Right.
How do you get out of owning your own business and into ADRA?
Yeah, that's quite a long story, so I'll give you the shorter version of it.
Well, the medium version.
The medium version, maybe. I had, the Lord had blessed, my business was very successful. I had a lot of staff by this stage and many, many clients. And I got more and more involved with the church. I was engaging with a conference. I was, we were doing the tax returns of all the pastors. We were doing that for them as service. And it just got more and more involved. And, I started getting calls as a lay preacher. Other congregations would say, will you come and preach on Sabbath? And, I started to move around more and more. And as I say, as the business was doing well, I had a lot of staff. They could actually run it. I had more time now to do those kind of things. So I just got to know a lot of people. I got very engaged with the church at many levels. And one of my core businesses was an audit practice. And I got on a call one day, and again, it was through some of those church networks, that ADRA had a problem in Mozambique, which obviously just next to South Africa, and could I send a team?
I love you said obviously.
Yeah,
for those people who have no
idea
the geography of
As
South
I said
Africa.
that, I should know that traveling the world today. And
in that obvious country, right up there.
Yeah, right next to South Africa on the ocean, yeah. And they said, would you send a team in? And I went in with a team, and we did a whole audit of ADRA in Mozambique. And, we eventually sent our findings off to what was then, ADRA International. I didn't know anything much about ADRA at all at that point in time. I just knew it was the humanitarian arm of the church. And, we did our work and sort of, walked away at that stage. And then some years later, got a call, would I help with the establishment of some of the legal structures within Africa for ADRA, and I engaged with some ADRA people at that stage. But again, it was very ad hoc, and and my engagement was professional, through all of those years. And then, I can't remember, 20-some years in, 22, 23 years in, I'm preaching at a church in just outside of Pretoria, which is South Africa's capital. It's probably about an hour's drive from where I lived in Johannesburg. And I was invited to this congregation, a small congregation again, and I preached that Sabbath. And as we were standing at the door and shaking everyone's hand type of thing, a woman says to me, have you read this book? And she shows me this book, and it was the book called The Radical Prayer by Derek Morris. It had just come out. She said, I've got a spare copy. She said, if you don't have it, please take it. And I said, well, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. And, I went home that afternoon, and I started looking at this book. I loved reading, and it wasn't a long book. It was a fairly short book. So I started reading, and it captivated me. And I read. I mean, literally, I think I read the book through, that afternoon. And central to Dr. Morris's challenge in the book is the the verses in Scripture saying, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Pray the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest field. And then he adds sort of a parenthesis, and Lord, I give you permission to begin with me. And that intrigued me. Because again, the whole title of the book, The Radical Prayer, what he says is if you don't expect something radical to happen in your life, don't pray this prayer type of thing. And I was intrigued, and I thought, now, I wonder if I prayed that prayer, what would happen? And so that was an interesting part of my journey, because the more I thought about it, the more frightened I became. And the truth be told, as much as I was involved in the church, and I mean, I'd served as head elder for many, many years, and I was involved at the conference, I was doing all of these things, but the truth be told, there was a lot about my life that I didn't want to give up. I was very comfortable. I mean, got a successful business, the children all at private schools, we're having wonderful vacations every year, everywhere, and we had a great life, right? Great community, great friends. I'm going, oh my goodness, do I really want to turn my life, my world, my family's world upside down? And in my morning devotions, I would get to the point of, this clearly the Spirit's now nudging me, to pray this prayer. And I'm going, I didn't have the courage to pray the prayer. I was frightened to pray the prayer. And that's when I really began to realize that fundamentally there was something in my life that I wasn't prepared to let go of. And it took a long struggle with it. When I say long, I mean sort of went on for weeks. And eventually I said, Lord, I don't know what the issue is. I don't know why I was so frightened to pray the prayer. I said, but if you don't give me the courage, I don't think I'm going to be able to pray this prayer. And eventually one morning, the Lord gave me that courage and I prayed the prayer. And let me tell you, that started a journey that not in my wildest imaginings could I have ever dreamt of. The thing I realized is that when you're struggling with God, and I didn't sleep very well, there was some 6 weeks before I could pray that prayer. I would, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was outside walking and pacing up and down in the garden. When you're wrestling with God, He doesn't let you go. And I struggled to pray the prayer. And eventually, as I say, in my prayers, I said, Lord, what's the problem? What is it that's holding me back? And I can't say the Lord gave me a vision, but it's like the Lord showed me the beautiful home we had, my fancy Mercedes-Benz that I'd always wanted, and the life and everything. And it was almost an audible voice. He said to me, are you prepared to give this up for me? And that was hard. That was hard. And I'm going, I remember, it's like I argued with him. I said, I told him everything I did for him. I was a head elder, and we didn't have a pastor, and I was involved in this, and I'm doing this.
See, I am doing it,
yeah,
God.
I'm busy. Okay, now you want everything. Kind of. Really, it was.
He does want everything.
Yeah, that was the point. And again, I was on this journey of the Lord saying, yeah, but you're not prepared to give that up. And the truth was, and there's a lot of my upbringing I haven't shared, but my father was a man who abused alcohol. And so we had very, very little at home. And I realized that money was my security blanket. That was the issue. It wasn't really about money. It was about security. In my mind, that was security. And what the Lord was now doing is He was sticking His finger right into the place where I didn't want to let go. And that was hard. But eventually, again, through many of those walks in the garden in the morning, I remember falling to my knees one morning and saying, okay, Lord, the battle's over. What do you want? And it's the only time in my life I can say I heard an audible voice. Go to your bedroom. Had an old Adventist review. He said, go and get the review. It was that clear. I went in, got the review, opening the review. I'm going, now what? What? I'm supposed to look at the review. Read it. Is there an article here? You're trying to tell me something? And next thing, opening, and here's an advert. And there was just a sense about me. Here's an advert for Griggs. And the first thing is, you could do a BA in religion and things. And I'm going, are you kidding me? You want me to be a pastor? Is this really? This is what you want? And then there was something about nursing. I go, well, never. That's never happening.
It's not nursing, not the call.
No, it's really. And the next morning, I was having a breakfast with a friend of mine who at that stage was he was the conference president at that stage. And so I'm telling him the story, and I'm going, well, what do you think the Lord wants of me? And he says, I said, do you think He wants me to be a pastor? And it was Dave Spencer. He started laughing. He said, oh, no, never. I said, well, I was quite offended. I'm going, well, why not? What makes you so special kind of thing? And he said to me, Michael, I know you. He said, you're a driven businessman. He says, if you get a call midnight from some church member going, Pastor, I want you to pray with me. He says, I know how you're going to react. You're not a pastor. You're not going to do that. But then he said words I'll never forget. He said, whatever it is that the Lord wants you to do, He has been preparing you your whole life for this. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, so you've answered, but you haven't answered the question. What is this? Anyway, cutting short a long story there, one of the courses on offer, it was actually ultimately came under Andrews, was a master's program which had actually been developed for doctors going to the mission field and giving them sort of a précis of the doctrines of the church. I learned all sorts of new words, hermeneutics and homiletics, and all of a sudden I was online.
I understand those.
Yes, and all of a sudden I'm starting to study all of this stuff.
We're going to exegete that passage,
yes,
right?
That's right. As I say, meta-narratives. I'm going, oh my goodness, this is a whole new
okay,
vocabulary.
just study the soteriology of this.
Like, what is this whole world that all of a sudden I'm entering, And so I started studying online. But again, the question was, I didn't know where this was going. No idea where this was going. Why am I doing this? It's kind of, yes, so it was enriching my preaching as a lay preacher. And I loved it. I was studying, I was learning new things. I enjoyed all of that, but I didn't know where this was going. I had no idea. And, the Lord and I every morning would be going like, what is this? What am I doing this for? And one day I get a call. And it was from the then president of ADRA International, Jonathan Duffy. And I hear this Australian accent. And he says, well, Michael, he said, you don't know me, but I've heard a lot about you. And he says, I'm trying to set ADRA globally on a new pathway. And he said, I think you may have the skills we need to kind of turn ADRA around and make it what it really could be. And would you be willing to consider the position as CFO of ADRA International? And I remember I'm kind of driving and I'm going, huh? Hang on, I had my own business. Like, what is this? Curveball out of left field type of thing. And he said to me, look, you'd have to, we'd like to interview you. You'd have to put in a resume. And I remember it was the funniest thought. I thought, I'd never, ever crafted a resume. Because I'd left university, went to work for a couple of guys, opened my own business. I never had a resume.
You didn't give yourself a resume?
No.
For when you hired yourself?
I never had a resume. It's quite funny. And I'm going, I was sitting on the beach. Now it's December, it's hot in South Africa. We're on the beach, we're on vacation. And I'm sitting there with my laptop and I'm going to my wife, okay, well, I know I'm trying to do a resume. I'm going, when did I graduate? What year? You're trying to fill these details. And I couldn't remember all this stuff. So anyway, I'm doing this, and eventually I sent that off to Jonathan, and I don't hear anything. And I thought, oh, well, this is the church, they've reached out, never going to hear from these guys. And next thing, I get the call back that says, yeah, we want to interview you. And this is when it started to get a little bit real. I kind of thought, hang on. Okay, hang on. I own my own business. I've got staff who have been with me for over 20 years. They've been loyal. I don't just get to resign and walk away. I mean, I own properties, I own the buildings, I own, it just doesn't work that way. And I remember that night in praying, I said, well, Lord, if this is what you want, and this seems very far-fetched to me, who would I sell my business to? I remember asking the question. I'm lying there at night, not able to sleep. Who would I sell my business to? And he says to me, Marius. I hear the audible voice, Marius. And I had a friend, Marius, who was also a chartered accountant, but he worked for one of the big listed companies on the stock exchange. And I thought, well, why would he be interested? And anyway, I kind of dismissed it. And some weeks later, I got on a plane, came to the general conference for the first time in my life, and sat in one of the rooms in this building today. And as a lay person, it's just a very different experience coming into this building. Other than I worked here 10 years now, so at that stage it was a very different experience. And because I was what I would call an outsider, not someone who was coming through the church system, I had everybody around the table. I had general conference vice presidents. I had the treasurer of the general conference. I had the head of the legal council. I mean, I had everybody. I think there were 13 people around that table. And I'm going, oh my goodness, what is this? Type of thing. And anyway, I had the interview and went back to the hotel, and my wife said, well, how did it go? I said, I don't know. This is sort of the first time I've really been interviewed for anything in my life. I don't know how that went. And I got on a plane, flew back to South Africa, and went back to my business, carried on working. And weeks went by, months went by. I thought, oh, well, these guys have obviously, employed somebody else, and I just got on with my life. I just kind of dismissed it at that stage. And I was actually driving to my physician's office. I was on my way for a physical that morning, and my phone rings, and I can see it's a US number coming in. And Jonathan's on the line, Jonathan Duffy, and he says, well, Michael, he says, I need to tell you, the decision around the table was unanimous. We want you to be the CFO of ADRA. We want you to join us as soon as possible. And I mean, that sort of hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, that was kind of like, whoa, hang on. in some way, I'd almost been toying and playing with it up to this point. Now it became real. And I remember that, I went to the doctor's office and they put these probes on me and they're doing an ECG, and the guy says, "Man, your resting heart rate's so high." I said, "Don't worry about it. I know why." Because my heart's racing. I'm going, "This is insane. My life's about to. And after the doctor's appointment, I drove straight home. I said to my wife, I said, she looked at my face. She says, "You got the call, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, I did." And she looked at me, she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said to her, "Well, it's not about what I'm going to do. What are we going to do?" Kind of thing. And through all of this, I've always, Delaney has been sort of my rock my whole life. She's the one who held the faith. She was the one who said, "Well, you put this in God's hands. He's the one who'll see it through." In the business, when I was struggling with cash flow at the end of the month and I had to pay wages and salaries, she'd go, "God's never let you down. He'll never let you down." All through my life. And she said, "Well," she said, "I'm enormously proud of you." I said, "You're giving your life to God, and we must go." And I thought, whew. I said, "Do you know what that means?" She said, "Yeah, of course I know what that means." And then the next morning, I thought of Morris. I remember that the Lord had given me whilst I was on vacation who would buy my business. And I called Morris. I said to him, "I need to see you." And as he describes it now, he heard my voice and he thought, "Oh, this is trouble," whatever it is. I said, "I need to see you." And met him at a nearby coffee shop. He was on his way to work. And I said, "Do you want the 60-second version or long version?" He said, "Give me the 60-second version." I said, "I've been offered a job in the US. I want you to buy my business." And he kind of looked at me and he said, "Okay." I did not expect that for the day. But he said to me, "You know what?" He had a boat on a lake, and the next day was a public holiday in South Africa. He says, "Come up there, let's get on the boat. Let's go water skiing and we can talk." And we did. Went up there, got on the boat. It was a Friday. We water skied through the day, we talked through the day, and it was closing to the end of the day. Sunset was coming. I said, "Lord, we need to get off the lake now on Sabbath." And I said, I need to know where this is going. And I remember Morris's wife looked at him and she said, "Well, you've spoken all day. What's your decision?" And he stood up on the boat and he extended his hand. He shook my hand. He says, "You have a deal. I will buy your business." And Monday morning, he walked into his job. He handed in his resignation. 2 weeks later, he was sitting in my office.
Wow.
And he ended up not only buying the business, he bought the building where everything, there are many miracles I can tell, the sale of our home, so many things that happened so incredibly rapidly. I mean, within months, I'd gone from owning my own business, sort of living our own lives, to standing at Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. with 10 suitcases. And it was a bit of a bombshell. It wasn't easy. And the next thing, I was sitting in an office as the CFO of ADRA, starting to transition from a world where you've been a businessman your whole life. Now you're coming into a sector, and I say the sector, the NGO sector, whose culture is different. Now all of a sudden you're coming into the church, which has its own culture entirely. Yeah. And so everything's transitioning. My son went off to Walla Walla, my daughter went off to Southern, eldest, and the youngest went to Spencerville Academy. I think she was about 14 at the time. And so we went from being a very nuclear family, all sort of sitting around a dinner table every night, and all of a sudden got to the US, and my son was gone, my eldest daughter was gone, the youngest one, was saying, "What's just happened?" My brother and sister left, and she's at school. And to a large measure, when you work with ADRA, you live on an aeroplane. And so, it dramatically altered our lives. There's no doubt about it. I just think back often to one little book called The Radical Prayer, given by a lady who I didn't know, in a church I'd never been to before. And how reading that book and praying that prayer fundamentally altered and radically altered not only my life, but the life of my family.
Can you remind us real quick what the radical prayer is?
The radical prayer fundamentally is, again, going back to those words, The harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Pray, Lord of the harvest, to send out workers into his harvest field. And again, there's a parenthesis, and I give you permission, Lord, to begin with me. The radical prayer is about saying, Lord, it doesn't matter about who I am. It doesn't matter about my life. I am willing to give my life to you, fully and unreservedly. Not on my terms, on your terms, Lord. What is that you want from my life? Not what I want from my life. What do you want? That old hymn, I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord. That's what it is. And, we say those words. But the question is, are we willing to fully surrender? Yeah. I surrender all. We sing the hymn. Well, God is actually calling for a full surrender. And as where he had to put his finger in my heart of the things that I didn't want to let go of, where I had to learn that money is not your security. My God is my security. He is the one who is in charge. He is the one who knows what tomorrow holds. That it is in his hands that my life now is. There's no better place where it could be. But I needed to change. My whole life has been the Lord working on me. And I can see those intersection points. As a child, people sitting in those junior Sabbath school, those teachers, to people in churches, Dr. Landless, others who have played an instrumental role in my life, bringing me to where I am today. Not because of me. Not because of me. It's because of God's grace and his call. And the most radical thing in our lives is that we have to give up. And we don't do that easily as human beings. We hold on. And even if we give up a lot, there's still some things that we hold on to. But God's calling for that unreserved giving up. And genuinely meaning, I surrender all. That's the challenge.
Michael, I cannot thank you enough for making the time. I know we've tried to get together a few times.
I know.
Your schedule is so busy. I want to thank you for joining us. Before we sit down off camera, we always pray. And I prayed that your story would be a blessing to somebody.
Yeah,
and I want you to know your story was a blessing to me. We sit in Sabbath school, and you are not just a Sabbath. Like, I know your heart now. I know your story, and it was beautiful to see you really fully surrender to God. Thank you so much for being willing to come and share that.
It's a privilege. And maybe just closing, I remember a man who's become a good friend, Vladimir Kachuk. He was the treasurer in ESD for many years. And I remember he asked me, I was at Bucha in Ukraine, and he asked me to tell my story to the students. There's about 400 or 500 students there. And I said to him, Vladimir, I said, I'm a very private person. I don't really like to tell my story. And I'll never forget his words. He says, Michael, you're wrong. He says, it's not your story. It's God's story. Never forget those words. Our story is God's story. And it's a privilege to share it because maybe it will touch someone else's life.
Thank you so much.
It's a privilege being here. Thank you.
I don't do this often. I think I've maybe done this 3 times, but I want to make an appeal to those of you who are watching this right now. If you have not prayed that kind of a radical prayer, maybe it's time to do so. Maybe the Holy Spirit has been working on your heart for a very long time. Maybe he has been accumulating gifts and talents within you to use to further his kingdom. If you have watched my story, you know that I also had to pray a very similar radical prayer that Michael prayed. Maybe it's your turn today. I'm going to be praying for each one of you viewers that when this episode comes out, that you will pray that radical prayer. And if you do, know that we are praying along with you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A&M Profiles with my special guest, Michael Kruger. If you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, YouTube channel, wherever it is you're tuning in from today. I don't want you to miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with me, and join me next time as we continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people.